Hey, what's up? Welcome back to your channel name. This time, we're going to dive into a story that will make you think twice before walking alone at night. Grab some snacks, turn off the lights, and listen closely. Daniel Faulkner was not a hiker, nor a thrill-seeker. He was merely a freelance writer from England, specializing in forgotten tales and buried folklore. His books often spoke of abandoned villages, hidden shrines that only appeared during certain moons, or legends passed only through the trembling lips of the elderly. That was why he chose Mont Larmont, a small mountain rarely mentioned in travel guides but repeatedly referenced in the crumbling letters of a 19th-century French ethnologist. The journey to the village at the mountain's base took 2 days. First came a narrow train, then a rented car that grew lonelier with each winding mile. The road thinned and twisted, as if daring travelers to reconsider. The village itself lay in a basin between two cliffs, shrouded by thick woods that formed a natural barricade against the rest of the world. Upon arrival, the air felt heavier, as if the atmosphere itself carried a burden. The sky remained gray, indifferent to weather or time. Wooden houses stood in tired silence, appearing to wait for something, or someone, that never returned. Daniel rented a small room in a worn guesthouse that doubled as a general store. The owner, an elderly woman with piercing eyes, didn't ask why he had come. She merely looked at him in a way that made him feel as though he had crossed a threshold best left untouched. In the days that followed, Daniel wandered the village, gathering fragments of lore through relics, carvings on fences, and murmured stories of the old. Strangely, no one dared to name the peak of Mont Larmont aloud. They referred to it only as, up there, or gestured vaguely with a tilt of the chin, as if naming it might awaken something better left asleep. A strange pattern emerged. Every missing hiker had one thing in common: they ignored a single, silent rule: never be on the eastern trail after sunset. That time frame sounded like superstition, yet the sheer number of vanishings linked to that twilight hour was too consistent to dismiss. Even locals avoided the path. Not for lack of knowledge, but from a quiet, collective decision that had hardened into tradition. Daniel met an old man who wept while speaking of his son, lost 15 years ago. The boy had climbed the mountain to gather rare mushrooms and never returned. His bag and jacket were found intact 2 days later near a ridge, yet there was no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed him. The most unsettling detail was how the village reacted to disappearances. There were no mass searches, no posters. Only silence. As though losing people to the mountain had become part of the unspoken deal they had long ago accepted. The name Mountain Thug came from a handwritten entry in an old priest's journal dated 1793. The priest described a fugitive, once a mercenary soldier, who fled into the mountain after murdering a full platoon of royal guards. Covered in crude tattoos and armed with stolen weapons, the man was considered feral even among criminals. The king's soldiers pursued him to Mont Larmont, where they surrounded the peak for 3 days. When they finally captured him, they executed him on the spot. But one survivor of that mission wrote something strange. He claimed that before dying, the fugitive spat out a curse, vowing to own every inch of the mountain and to consume anyone who dared to trespass. Though scholars dismissed the tale as folklore, in the village it still breathed. Even the children knew not to stray near the eastern slope in the evenings. The legend endured not through books, but through silence, glances, and closed doors. Locals believed that the thug never truly left. That his rage, sealed with blood and frost, had taken root in the mountain itself. And with every lost soul, the legend grew stronger. Daniel began comparing old maps to new ones, searching for hidden paths. Eventually, he uncovered a long-abandoned trail leading straight to the mountain's eastern side. It wasn't marked on any recent topographical scans, yet the lines of the earth confirmed it had once been active. Following whispers and intuition, he located the trailhead, marked by a stone etched with spiral symbols and claw-like grooves. These carvings weren't listed in any archaeological databases. They looked primitive, yet deliberate, as if left by something that wanted to be remembered, or feared. The trail was overgrown, silent, untouched by animals. Even birds avoided the branches above. Dead leaves layered the ground like untouched parchment. As he climbed, he discovered fragments of rotted wood and decayed rope, remnants of past attempts to scale the area. They suggested this route had once been maintained, then suddenly abandoned. Despite the growing dread, Daniel pressed forward. The deeper he ventured, the stronger the feeling that he was walking not into nature, but into a story carved out of earth and forgotten by time. The higher he climbed, the stranger things became. A sharp scent of burning tobacco hung in the air, old and bitter, like pipe smoke from a century ago, yet no smoke followed. Every few steps, a rustle echoed nearby, though no wind stirred the trees. The bark of nearby trees bore slashes, deep and erratic, like claw marks. In some places, the gashes formed patterns, faces twisted in agony, hands stretched toward the sky. He tried photographing them, but when reviewing the images, several were missing, as if the device had refused to record what it saw. Further up, he found a bench carved from dark wood, placed oddly in a clearing. An eye symbol had been scratched into the backrest. Beneath it lay a metal lighter, old, ornate, and strangely warm to the touch. Yet the earth around it was damp, the type that hadn't seen fire in days. His pulse quickened. The signs were not mere relics, they were markers. Warnings. Invitations. Something on the mountain was aware of him now. And it did not want him to turn back. As twilight approached, the mountain transformed. A dense fog crept up from the gorge, blanketing the trees in a cold mist that seemed to move against the wind. Visibility narrowed with each breath. Daniel paused, sensing a pressure building around him, not physical, but something intangible, like being watched through the mist by unseen eyes. Then came the sound. Not footsteps. Not birds. But whispering. Soft at first, almost musical. It rose from beneath the fog like a chant spoken from the forest floor. The voices weren't in any language Daniel recognized. They didn't seem to form words, but they spoke nonetheless. They curved around him, passed through his ears, into his skull, and settled in his bones like frost. He scanned the trees but found only mist and shadows. Yet the whispers persisted, growing louder whenever he moved forward and receding when he stood still. They weren't echoes. They were following him. He thought of turning back, but the trail behind had vanished into the fog. Trees that had been there moments before now stood in different shapes, different angles. He had crossed into something. The mountain had shifted. And he was no longer a guest. The path widened unexpectedly. Daniel found himself standing in a clearing littered with rusted nails, thousands of them, buried halfway into the soil, heads sticking upward like teeth from the earth. At the center stood a low stone platform, more an altar than a monument, wrapped with a thick chain and marked by deep gashes in the rock. Surrounding the clearing were wooden poles, each carved with grotesque faces, mouths agape, eyes gouged. The carvings appeared frantic, as if whoever made them had done so in a hurry, with fear behind every cut. One pole had fresh blood on it, thick, still red, and slowly dripping. There were no animals around, no signs of recent life. Yet the blood smelled warm, coppery, and close. Daniel's camera refused to turn on. He stepped closer to the altar, and the whispers returned, this time with force. They were now layered, hundreds of overlapping murmurs, some screaming, others laughing, and a few reciting what sounded like old military chants. His chest tightened. The air thinned. And in that moment, he realized he had stumbled into a ritual site, something left intact not because it was forgotten, but because it was still in use. At the altar, Daniel saw something impossible. The fog around the clearing thickened, coiling downward into the shape of a man. A silhouette emerged, broad shoulders, a crooked posture, head slightly tilted like a predator watching prey. The figure had no eyes, only two burning hollows where the sockets should have been. Smoke leaked from its mouth and nostrils, curling into the air like incense from a cursed temple. The man wore tattered military pants, combat boots half melted into his flesh, and the remnants of a jacket stained with soot and blood. Across his bare chest were crude tattoos, symbols Daniel had seen in old sketches, ones associated with execution squads and outlaw mercenaries. The mountain thug had returned. But this was no ghost. No transparent illusion. This thing breathed. Labored, shuddering breaths that echoed through the stones. The smoke that formed him hissed and curled, reacting to Daniel's heartbeat. The creature hadn't noticed him. Not yet. Daniel stood frozen as a deep cracking sound came from within the figure's chest. It turned its head. And for the first time, the fog itself recoiled. Whatever was in front of him wasn't bound by death. It had become the mountain's will. Daniel ran. He didn't decide to. His legs simply moved, tearing through the fog, crushing nails, cutting through branches, driven by terror beyond comprehension. Behind him came the sound, heavy, uneven footfalls dragging across gravel and stone. The thug didn't run. It didn't need to. The mountain moved with it. The trail warped. Trees bent unnaturally, leaning in his path as if trying to trap him. Daniel's breath grew ragged. Cuts appeared across his arms from unseen brambles. His pack felt heavier, his feet stumbled on rocks that hadn't been there moments before. Then came the laughter. Not loud, but constant, like a throatless chuckle bouncing from every direction. It wasn't mocking. It was hungry. With every step, Daniel could feel the mountain growing tighter, drawing him inward. The air turned metallic, sharp in his lungs. He collapsed near a crooked tree, mud soaking through his clothes. And then everything went silent. He woke to darkness. Not nightfall, something deeper. The kind of dark that seems to breathe. He was inside a hollow, carved beneath the roots of the tree. He didn't remember crawling there. His fingers were caked in soil, his nails cracked and bleeding. His backpack was gone. Outside, the wind had stopped. The fog no longer moved. Time itself seemed suspended. Etched on the inside of the hollow were words in Old French, faded, barely legible. But Daniel translated them with shaking lips. Buried, not forgotten. Bound by wrath. Fed by fear. Beneath those words was a pile of bones. Human. Some ancient. Some with flesh still clinging. Then came the sound of boots. One step. Then another. Close. Precise. Measured. The mountain thug hadn't lost him. It had led him here. To its altar. To its feeding ground. And Daniel realized he was no longer a writer documenting a forgotten legend. He was the next chapter. Daniel didn't know how long he lay there. Time had ceased to matter. The forest no longer obeyed the rules of daylight or night. When he finally crawled out from beneath the roots, the world had changed. The trees were no longer green, they were ashen, their bark blackened as if by fire. The wind no longer whispered through leaves, it carried something heavier, like screams stretched thin across miles of silence. He stumbled through the woods, guided by an instinct deeper than logic. His skin itched with invisible bites. His ears pulsed with the echo of footsteps that never touched the ground. Every time he thought he was alone, he felt a breath on his neck that vanished when he turned. Then, out of nowhere, he heard screaming, not his, not distant, but all around. The same scream, multiplied dozens of times. Male, female, even childlike. All layered, all real. Not echoes from the past, warnings from others. Warnings that came too late. Each scream was cut off mid-breath. Like a throat suddenly crushed. He found his camera. Not where he dropped it, this time, it was placed. Propped on a broken stone, its lens facing the clearing, its red indicator light blinking faintly. The battery had somehow recharged. The screen glowed in the darkness, revealing a playback option. Daniel pressed it, hands trembling. The footage was impossible. It showed him sleeping under the tree. But not alone. The mountain thug stood inches behind him, motionless, its head bent unnaturally low, watching him breathe. Hours passed in seconds, and the figure never moved. Then, just before the clip ended, it looked directly into the camera. And smiled. The screen flickered. Then cut to black. Daniel dropped the camera. He no longer cared about proof. This wasn't a story anymore, it was a haunting that had chosen him. As he fled from the clearing, his foot struck something wooden, an old, half-buried sign. The lettering was worn, but he could still make it out. Zone militaire interdite, autre interdite sous peine de mort. Military zone. Forbidden entry. Punishable by death. But this was no modern warning. The sign was from another time. And beneath it, scrawled in paint barely visible through the grime, were newer words. No one leaves the mountain once seen. Daniel's pulse surged. He followed a narrow path behind the sign, one not marked on any map he had studied. It was lined with shattered helmets and empty gas canisters, their labels burned away. As he walked, the sound of boots returned, but now, they weren't behind him. They were ahead. Waiting. Daniel stumbled into an old military convoy, two rusted trucks, half buried in moss and mud, their doors wide open, and their cabins scorched from the inside. Weapons lay scattered across the forest floor, untouched by time. Yet what terrified him most was the last truck. Inside were 10 sets of restraints bolted to the walls. Only 6 had bones in them. The others were empty, the cuffs broken, from the inside. Spray-painted across the interior was a phrase repeated over and over. He walked still. We should not have chained him here. Daniel backed away, his mind spinning. These were not legends. They were records. Someone, or something, had been buried alive in these woods. A man turned beast. A war criminal never tried in court, but punished by exile into a place that absorbed him completely. And now he was loose. Or perhaps, he had never been bound. Just as he turned to leave the convoy, Daniel saw it again, through the cracked glass of the truck's windshield. In the distance, halfway down the mountain, a figure stood on the ridge. The same silhouette. Smoke drifted up from its shoulders. Its arms hung low like they had no bones. And though too far to see clearly, Daniel knew it was staring right at him. He blinked, and it vanished. Not into fog. Into flame. A small brush fire ignited on the ridge, forming a perfect circle around where the figure had stood. And in the middle of it, visible only for a second before the smoke swallowed it whole, was a single, unmistakable boot print. Fresh. Still smoldering. And pointed straight toward the valley below. Daniel ran, not for the first time, but now with a truth etched in his bones. The mountain thug was not guarding the mountain. He was preparing to leave it. And the world below was not ready. That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you, if you still dare to watch next time.